Okay, screen is yours.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Tan. I'm CEO of Meadowfield Capital, and I'm here to present to you on the global markets and where we see the long-term investment opportunities globally. Okay. First of all, let's take a look at what drives markets in the for a long run performance. I think many people think, oh, let's buy the market or the country with the highest economic growth. But actually that's not really the case. And I will show here these are the factors to drive the long run performance in markets. And with this, and knowing these factors, then we can actually pick the market that gives the best long run returns. So what we see here is that actually it's not economic growth that drives the market performance, even in the short run or long run. More importantly is financial stability, of course, matters. The country is not in a severe balance of payments crisis. Households are not too over leveraged, corporates too as well. And then number three is that, and quite importantly in my view, is that the makeup of the stock market. Is it made up of more of secular growth sectors and high quality companies? So as you can see in the table below, that as of 30th April 2024, that among the markets in over the last 10 years, it's the US that has given the best returns of about 12.4% annualized. More so than Europe, Japan, Taiwan, China, or Indonesia using the JCI. It's only 3.12%, and that's even as the GDP growth, lags far behind that of China or even Indonesia. So you can see over here, quite clearly that it's not just about economic growth that drives markets. This is kind of a more illustrative chart to show how good the US market returns have been compared to most of the other markets, even though it doesn't have the best economic growth. And whereas you see that some countries, where economic growth has been strong, whereas the equity returns have actually been quite lackluster since 2009. Yeah, so as you can see here, there's a big contrast between the US as well as say Malaysia, or even that of Singapore as well. Well, where some of the Asian countries have actually better economic growth than the US, but their returns lag far behind, over the long term since 2009. So I think what is important to understand is that a lot of it depends on the market sector breakdown. As you can see here, is there was a market. My thesis is that the markets with the higher proportion of secular growth sectors and more companies with great business models do well in the long run. So like you can see the S&P 500 secular growth sectors I would classify as that mainly in the information technology, healthcare, consumer discretionary, because they've got many branding companies with strong franchises. And communication services, but of course, I think that is a caveat. In communication services, it's not just about telcos, but it also includes, companies like Facebook as well as Google, which are classified under communication services. So you can see that the S&P 500 has got a high weight in these secular growth sectors, and therefore, I think, and that's one of the reasons why it's got good equity returns. The other one that has a good concentration of high, secular growth sectors is that of Taiwan, although a large part of it belongs to information technology, and particular Taiwan Semiconductor, one company. So its returns are also not far behind the US. It's about 12% compound annual growth rate over the last 10 years. So what makes a great business model and a long-term compounder? A long-term compounder means that you can just buy the company, with these characteristics and hold it over the long term, and the returns will keep compounding and give you better than market returns. This is the idea of many of the great investors like Warren Buffett. the kind of stocks he looks for. And these are the characteristics of such companies. Businesses that have strong economic moat, a durable competitive advantage and pricing power, a rising long-term price trend, good profitability metrics with high ROE and ROIC. And looking at the financials, they have consistently rising revenues, net income, cash flows, and gross and net margins are either consistent or rising as well. And the company is also has conservative debt structure and financially sound too as well. Yeah, so many of the companies in these secular growth sectors have such characteristics, and in particular, the US has quite a lot of these companies. This is just a sample of them. This is what you call the US Magnificent 8 stocks. These are dominant market players with strong franchise and financials. Many of them are household names in the US, and you may recognize some of them too as well. Netflix, Tesla, Meta, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Apple, Nvidia. So these are the companies that have a global reach and a global franchise, and good returns. They demonstrate all the characteristics of high quality growth businesses, and the US has quite a lot more of this than many of the markets that I've actually seen. Okay, so this therefore I conclude that why the US market remains a good long-term investment destination. So the first reason is that it's got a high number of companies with great business models, dominant market franchises that are long-term compounders. It also has financial stability. The USD is still the world's reserve currency, right? So that allows a lot of flexibility for the Fed, to do quantitative easing without any detrimental impact on its currency. Corporates in general have been deleveraging. Household balance sheets are healthy compared to pre-global financial crisis, so the savings rates are higher than they were before the financial crisis. And third, but not least, is that this is the market with the longest term history, and a history of more than 100 years shows that the market is up the majority of the time, and you never lose money when holding over, let's say, a 15-year time horizon. Yeah. Okay. So in the whole history of the US markets, up years happen more than 75% of the time. This chart is only updated up to 2022, but if you include 2023 and potentially 2024, then this percentage is probably slightly higher too as well. So it makes a good long-term investment if you buy a market that's up more than it is down. Yeah. Every year, is up at least 75% of the time. This is kind of like a more sort of like another chart to show that how the market and only this applies mainly to the US market always goes up in the long run over here. Of course, there have been years of where there's been kind of like stagnation, like these secular bear markets in 1937 to 1950. Another time during the late 60s to 1980 as well. And then, during the tech bubble burst, another 13 years over here. But you can see that even if you bought at the worst time before the secular bear market, you will still make money if you hold long enough, and over, let's say, 10 years or slightly over 10 years. And it can show you that if you do a certain strategy called dollar cost averaging, you will actually make profits faster. You will not be down that for that long actually. Okay. So over here, there's also another chart that shows that while there's always some fear of a bear market, it's actually the best opportunity to buy into the market. Okay. Bear markets set up for longer and stronger bull markets to follow. You can see that in every bear market, for the history of the S&P 500, first of all, they're down on average about 34.6%. And that's including the global financial crisis when it was down up to minus 57% at its worst. Okay, this is the worst returns from peak to bottom. Okay, but the bull markets are much stronger. You can see that they can go to up to triple-digit returns, and they last also much longer than the bear markets. So just looking at the recent history, when we saw a bear market in 2022 where the S&P 500 was down 18% and down maybe 24% at its worst, but we can see that the recovery since then, the market was up 26% in 2023, and so far in 2024 it's up another 12% as well. So these bear markets are usually followed by bull markets that last longer and are much stronger, in terms of the price recovery compared to the bear market. And so the key to successful investing is actually staying invested amidst the deluge of bad headline news. You notice that most of the time, the news you hear on the media, is quite bearish. It's usually quite bad, And like for instance, since the 2009 financial crisis, there's been a deluge of bad news since then, But every time there is bad news, yeah, maybe there might be a slight reaction to the market, but over the long term, it just keeps going up despite the fact that there's all this bad news. I mean, there's there's a saying in Wall Street that the markets climb a wall of worry. Yeah, the more worry there is, then actually the better potential there is, for a recovery in the markets. Yeah, so I think that's one thing to take about investing for the long term in the US. How does this compare with other markets? I think one market that's receiving a lot of attention now is Japan. Because the Japanese market is going through a lot of corporate reforms that could and that has been exciting the many investor participants. But note that Japan is a kind of like quite a different case over here, a developed market. But if you had invested at a peak in 1989, it will actually take you nearly 30 years to break even again. As you can see, this chart shows for the key stock indices of the topics as well as the Nikkei. So so I think my thesis on good long-term investment mainly applies to the US market. Whereas the history of other markets is kind of more patchy, and does not make the case for long-term investment, as compelling. So how do you invest amidst all this market volatility, right? There's going to be, ups and downs in the market. Although I would tell you that, yeah, you can just buy and hold and invest one shot. But actually, a better strategy, in my view, and especially when you're going through a market correction, is actually to do dollar cost averaging, which means that every month you put in the same amount of money over or every 3 months over regular periods of time. So, for instance, if you invest in this market volatility, you can see that your average cost over time, will actually amount to like just about under $15 and then you get it at a much sort of like a better cost, than if you invested in any of the peaks of the market over here. So because it's so difficult to time the market, so the simple strategy is just to do dollar cost averaging, and you actually get to buy the market, buy more of the market when it's cheap, and buy less of the market when it's expensive. And this dollar cost averaging strategy actually helps you to navigate bear markets better. As for instance, if you actually done dollar cost averaging during the global financial crisis, you can see that the average cost is probably halfway between the peak and the trough. Whereas during the global financial crisis, it took nearly 5 years to get back to the market peak. But if you actually did dollar cost averaging from peak to bottom and bought somewhere in the middle of the decline, it will just take you 1 year to break even, and then you're going to be in profits thereafter. So this actually shortens, your recovery time during a bear market. It's an excellent strategy to adopt, especially when markets are actually coming down and correcting. even in the worst case of the 1970s, where there was a what you call this lost decade and a secular stagnation, uh, you know, you can see that the if you dollar cost average from from the peak to the bottom of the of the market correction, where the market corrected by 50%, you will break even in just over a year and be in profits thereafter. So your time to recovery, is going to be much shorter, even during a long period of this secular stagnation. Yeah. So that is my take on investing amidst market volatility. Taking a look at other factors that I think can continue to drive the US market higher is the potential from flows from money markets to equities. So at the end of 2023, there was about 1.3 trillion, of money market funds in retail money market funds. And strangely enough, during that 2023 year, there were actually outflows in the equity market, and this is when the market was going up 20% plus. So investors have actually been continue to be kind of skeptical about this recovery and cautious during this whole time. So there were outflows, during this year. While the amount of money sitting in money market funds at the end of 2023, was about 6 trillion. So that, is a lot of ammunition, you see, that could potentially go back into the equity markets after all the outflows, during 2022 and 2023. And even this year, right? I think investors still continue to be fearful. You can see that, yes, there has been some periods where there's been some flows from money market, outflows of money market funds, probably going back to corporate bonds or probably going back to the equity markets. But over the last 4 weeks, I think there was another inflow of money going back to money markets. I think because the April correction sort of like scared some investors, and therefore they were putting more money into money markets again. So you can see that there's still a lot more, money market liquidity that can be deployed, into markets. Yeah. So at the end of 2023, there was 6 trillion, and so far in 2024, there has not been a lot of outflows yet going back into the market. So I think this is also another chart to navigate where we are right now, and sort of like whenever we are, there's a lot of optimism, there's a lot of belief and euphoria. It's actually the worst time to invest in the market. Okay, so like during the tech bubble in 2000, there was a lot of euphoria on certain internet stocks that were not making money. Whenever things get too euphoric and people are too more optimistic, ironically, it's actually the not a good time to get into the market. Now it's very hard to get to time the bottom of the market, and therefore it's very hard to get near the bottom. So what I look at is that is there still a lot of skepticism and disbelief in the market. So yes, the US market has recovered quite strongly since the 2022 bear, but there's still a lot of disbelief in it. A lot of investors are still skeptical. You can see it in the amount of money market retail funds that is out there. So buying at this point is less risky because there is still a lot of pessimism, and there's not yet euphoria and optimism in the market over here. So this will actually can continue to sustain a market recovery. Now, what can further drive this secular bull market? Well, I think it's obviously there's this AI wave that's going on now. So there's been waves of innovation, over the last many years in the market. The first wave came from the Industrial Revolution, the second wave too as well from the Industrial Revolution. Then we had electricity and the internal combustion. Then there was petrochemicals, electronics. The fifth wave came from technology, software, internet, social media. And now there's a sixth wave, which is all about AI, clean technology, robotics and drones. So we have just started this sixth wave, and it's only just started since actually in 2023. So we are still in the early years of this sixth wave that is driving the market now, right now, sixth innovation wave. Yeah, we can see that this innovation waves can last for actually many years. The fourth wave lasted for 40 years. The fifth wave lasted for 30 years. This sixth wave is still in its early stages over here. You could say it happened maybe in 2020, but there's been a lot of froth taken out, especially in the correction in 2022. So I think we still have many more years to go in this sixth wave of innovation. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. So with this, basically this generative AI, robotics and automation will massively increase productivity, reduce costs and time, and increase profits. For instance, in the 1990s, a company needed 8 employees to generate $1 million in revenue. Due to technology now, it needs just 2. Can you imagine like how many will it need to in 10 years time? So it just goes to show that technology is a key driver for productivity improvements, and then having less people to generate revenues, and that will increase profits for all of these companies. I think there have been studies to show, like this from McKinsey, that generative AI could add another 2.6 to 4.4 trillion annually to the global economy. And these are sort of like the stocks to invest in the AI value chain. So we've got a handful of companies over here that we've identified. Meta, Amazon, Alphabet, leading the pack. There's also the enablers, the semiconductors like ASML, Applied Materials, and obviously NVIDIA, and AMD, Applied Micro Devices. So looking at 2024 outlook, what could drive markets from here? Well, corporate earnings have been strong. There's been a 78% beat of corporates, well above the average of 75%, 70%. Well, maybe there's some headwinds. The Fed may be slower to cut rates. And we still have to look at the May consumer price inflation as well. April came in better than expected after 3 hot readings from January to March. But other measures like valuations, actually quite reasonable. You take out some of these magnificent 7 names, the FANG names, the market is only trading at about 15.8 times PE, which is not expensive compared to the historical average of the S&P 500 or 20 times. Technicals, breadth is expanding. We are seeing market recovery beyond just tech stocks. We actually see strong recovery in financials, in particular. It's even spreading to energy and some of the industrial names too as well. Well, flows, there's still tons of dry powder. Dry powder as in mean the cash that's sitting in money market funds that have not yet flowed back into equity markets because investors are still very skeptical about the recovery, although it's already been happening for nearly 1.5 years. And then, well, sentiment, there are still many top callers. That means people are calling for the top of the market. And that, to me, is a good sign because, that means there is still not a lot of euphoria and optimism yet in this US market recovery. So now I'm just going to talk about other long-term investment teams. Okay, so these are the teams I'm going to talk about one by one. First of all, there's the end of austerity and profligacy. Due to low unemployment, robust economic growth, and inflationary pressures, the US continues to run a high fiscal deficit. Both Republicans and Democrats are, continue to have a lot of spending plans in the works, and there's little concerted effort to control the ballooning deficit. Yeah, so it's this deficit is in the US is increasing. So basically, President Biden's signature policy has been this Inflation Reduction Act that provide large incentives for investment in advanced technology and green energy in the US. The government projects is to subsidies of 369 billion, but it could be multiples higher. As a result, there has been a range of beneficiaries in this respective sectors, particularly in like some of these alternative clean energy sectors. The other way to protect yourself against ballooning deficit and increased spending is that it could ultimately lead to higher inflation over the long run. So one way to actually protect yourself is buy US TIPS. So TIPS are Treasury issued securities which compensate investors for inflation. Now, real yields in these TIPS are now at 2%, which is probably at post-GFC highs. Okay, so it has not been higher for the last 15 to 20 years. So these real yields are actually very high. And in the event that inflation accelerates, these real yields will actually come down, and actually that will benefit TIPS over here. So it's so this is one way that investors can protect themselves from a ballooning deficit that can cause high inflation over the long run. There are other sectors. There are other, like there's a manufacturing renaissance going on in the US. As a result of the large spending, there's going to be increased capital spending and spillover effects to companies in the electrical and materials sector. Another sort of like issue that that is a long-term investment team is the nearshoring supply chain diversification. So geopolitical tensions have compounded since post-COVID for a drive for greater supply chain resilience. There's been more and more protectionist tariffs being imposed on, like for instance, Chinese imports, and have led many companies to set up facilities in other countries or intermediate their trade through these venues. So the beneficiaries have included, among others, Vietnam and Mexico. Yeah, so these are alternative markets that actually benefit from the supply chain diversification. And then energy transition. So as we discussed previously, energy transition is a multi-year theme. There are some names are really crowded and have continued to outperform, while others have continued to do well. But there are right on the bottom right hand is the chart of two under radar companies that are actually benefiting from the increased demand in electric poles in the US. One is Corpus Holding as well as Stella-Jones. So you can see that if you can unearth some interesting opportunities, from this energy transition team over here. Other examples of energy transition is that of uranium, nuclear power, which is being seen as another form of carbon-free energy. So uranium prices have doubled over the past year, and about 25% since November. Other themes is that a question of dollar dominance. So I think there's been the usage of secondary transactions, seizure of Russian foreign reserves, and the general use of the dollar-based financial system to penalize countries and companies deemed hostile to the US. So that's led for them to seek other alternatives to settle their trades. So Russia, for instance, has been diverting its reserves out of the dollar into gold since it seized Crimea in 2014. And this has accelerated after sanctions was applied in 2018. Apart from seeking to construct an alternative to SWIFT, China also has been increasing its gold reserves. So if there is a potential end to dollar dominance, we can definitely see gold taking off. Yeah. So gold is generally a non-interest cash flow yielding asset, and therefore is negatively highly correlated to real interest rates. However, gold prices have persistently diverged from real rates, which suggests a strong underlying resilience, likely driven by the central banks like Russia and China seeking to diversify from the dollar. So you can see that if this persistent divergence suggests that gold has significant upside, especially if real yields start coming down, which we think could happen going forward. So even though we expect real interest rates to remain high in the coming months, but when this reverses, gold will continue to see a substantial move upwards. So you can see that China investors are buying gold and government bonds due to the lack of safe assets, especially after the bursting of the property bubble and the lackluster performance of the stock market. You can investors, SOEs are just buying gold as well as government bonds. So as a result, the gold ETF in China have traded as much as 20% above spot at one point. Another long-term investment issue is that of demographics. So geopolitical instability in many frontier EM countries have led to large-scale illegal immigration that have overwhelmed many countries. Europe has faced this issue for many years, but more recently, the US has seen a sharp increase in such border crossing, and it has emerged as a top election issue as it is perceived to have led to a significant breakdown in law and order. Yeah. So as a result of this, stocks related to detention and prison management and private security have really done well over the past year. Many of them outperforming the S&P 500 as a sample of such stocks shown shown over here in this chart over here. So you can see that this is also another investment opportunity in the US, other than just AI attack as well, leveraging on the theme of demographics and all this illegal immigration and the breakdown of law and order in the US. So companies that improve security, will benefit from this. Another topic, area of that's giving some excitement over the markets, and I think it still is for good reason, is that of corporate reforms in Japan, which is a big catalyst for undervalued companies. So Japanese regulators have been trying for years to boost share valuations, but to no avail. But since last year, substantial reforms have seemed to start working. These include threatening to delist companies which fail to bring up their valuations. Now, many of these companies are deeply undervalued with assets marked below market value. Now, these companies are doing more shareholder-friendly activities like share buybacks, raising dividends, unraveling of cross-holdings in order to bring up their valuations. Yeah, otherwise, they'll be threatened, by the regulators with delisting. As a result of this corporate reforms and increased shareholder-friendly activities, Japan is one of the best performing markets over the 1 year in local currency terms at least. And basically, this is leveraging on the notion on one of the Ben Graham's value investing thesis, which is that to buy companies whose market cap is trading below their cash net of debt. Effectively, you can buy a company, pay off all its debt, and cash in and you still have enough money to cover the initial cost of owning the company. Now, these nets are impossible to find, nearly impossible to find in the US because it's very efficient, but it's still possible to find in Japan. So this represents, a good opportunity, to continue benefiting from corporate reforms in Japan. I think the last thing I'll talk about is biotech. There is many innovative technology companies that are reaching the cusp of the clinical trials and coming to the market. There's radiopharmaceuticals, a more targeted way to deliver powerful payload to cancer cells. They're seeing rapid innovation. Okay, and then in January, there was a first CRISPR treatment that was approved by the FDA, which is basically a genetic using genetic transportation, or transfer in order to to treat different diseases. In addition, big pharma companies are facing this thing called a patent cliff over here, where that means many of their patents for existing drugs are coming offline, and this is basically a headwind for them. So they have actually been deploying minimal capital over the last 2 years. So, you know, they are looking to actually acquire some of these biotech companies, then trying to develop their own pipeline too as well. So these new developments in biotech, as well as the potential for big pharma to acquire them, has been, you know, is potentially a good catalyst for the biotech sector. Now, biotech companies did see a lot of excesses during the COVID period, when there was a lot of excess liquidity, and you know, there was also, you know, it also continued right with the successful success of speculative investments like, you know, in ARK and crypto. But in the last 2 years, the biotech sector has experienced a sharp drop in valuations because funding has been much more difficult. So, you know, investing in biotech is kind of a special case where, you know, where if you just invest in the ETF, you probably will not do very well as what this biotech ETF has shown versus the S&P 500 over the past 5 years. But, you know, if you actually invest in specialist funds, you know, then I think you have a much higher chance of succeeding in biotech because where this is company selection is key. You know, for these specialist biotech funds, because it's like investing in a VC, right? Investing in biotech. So a lot of key technical expertise is required to find the right companies that will benefit from, you know, having their products come to the market faster. So I think this is a summary of the global long-term investment opportunities. In short, the US market remains a good long-term investment place where you can find many companies with great business models, which are long-term compounders. We talked about the end of austerity and fiscal profligacy, which is so invest in US tips. Nearshoring and supply chain diversification, key markets to watch out for are Vietnam and Mexico. And if there's a potential end of dollar dominance and the central banks buying alternatives to US treasuries, then gold will continue to benefit. And then the energy transition, there is electric infrastructure as well as alternative energy supplies like uranium. In demographics, you know, we can see the rise of prison management and private security businesses in the US. And there's Japanese nets and corporate reforms. You know, so the Japan market is ripe for many opportunities to buy these net companies, and we know we have a catalyst for corporate reforms to bring up their valuations. And last but not least are these biotech specialist funds. Okay, so I think with that, I hope this gives you an idea of the many global market long-term opportunities that are still out there. And you know, I'll leave it, you know, to the floor to ask me any questions about this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mark Tan. So that's presentation from Mr. Mark Tan for today's session. If any of attendants want to ask questions, you can ask questions on Q&A button on the Zoom. And because there's no questions so far, we'll go to the next speakers, Mr. Isvan Helmi. Maybe Mr. Mark will wait, and then if there's any questions during the webinar, we will back to you, Mr. Mark. Would you don't mind?
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Then next, I'm moving to Mr. Isvan. Hi.
Thank you. Hi.
Okay?
Thank you, Mr. Rogi. Should I continue in English or in Bahasa?
Up to you. English or Bahasa?
Is it okay, Mark, if we continue in Bahasa as we have a bunch of clients from local companies here?
Sure, no problem. Please go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Selamat siang teman-teman sekalian yang sudah join. Terima kasih atas waktunya. Saya lanjutkan presentasi dari Mark Tan yang sudah Mr. Mark Tan yang sudah sangat komprehensif mengenai global. Untuk sesi saya mungkin we'll talk a little bit more on the domestic challenges ya, seperti yang sudah di blast judulnya domestic challenges. Jadi kita mulai dari economic update. Mungkin yang baru-baru ini sedikit fresh di ingatan teman-teman adalah ada dua berita yang keluar beruntun, di mana pertama itu trade balance kita itu 2 bulan berturut-turut di atas 3 miliar US dollar. current account di first quarter kemarin it's not a good news di mana current account defisit kita itu melebar widen to minus 1.1 percentage of GDP. Cuman kami melihat bahwa all the bad news is already behind us. Artinya ada beberapa faktor ke depan yang kita melihat bahwa di semester 2 nanti karena account defisit kita itu bisa turning into surplus. Nanti kita akan bahas satu-satu. Cuman the bottom line is we forecast current account surplus di semester 2 di second half itu nanti mencapai 0,2 sampai 0,23%, di mana kami melihat bahwa konsensus saat ini behind the curve, artinya konsensus mostly project current account defisit bisa continue sampai semester 2, tapi ada beberapa faktor yang memang kita melihat bahwa konsensus itu belum banyak memfaktorkan dalam proyeksinya. Salah satunya adalah beroperasinya mega smelters dari Freeport dan juga Aman Mineral. Namun secara full year kami melihat bahwa current account tetap defisit. Kenapa? Karena di quarter 1 ini current account kita itu defisit sekitar 2 miliar US dollar, which is itu cukup berat untuk bisa dihapuskan di 3 quarter berikutnya. Jadi kalau full year kita masih prediksi bahwa current account defisit minus 0,2% terhadap GDP. Artinya ini inline dengan proyeksi dari pemerintah, di mana untuk full year itu pemerintah ekspektasi minus 0,1 sampai minus 0,9% terhadap GDP. Jadi secara in-house kami melihat full year memang masih defisit, tetapi semester 2 itu akan slowly gaining mencapai positif ya, artinya current account surplus seperti terlihat di table di mana 0,2% itu karena account surplus di terhadap GDP di kuartal 3 dan kuartal 4 itu 0,3. Sedangkan untuk trade balance, average monthly trade balance ini kita bagi berdasarkan quarter, di mana first quarter di mana kita sudah bisa ambil rata-rata itu cuma 2,5 miliar dolar. Tetapi di kuartal 2 ini kami melihat bahwa trade balance kita itu bisa menebal lagi mencapai sekitar 3,3, dan ending the year nanti di tahun kuartal 4 nanti bisa mencapai 3,6 sampai 3,7 miliar US dollar. Nah, mungkin teman-teman bisa lihat di chart ini bahwa kita breakdown trade balance by kategori, di mana kita lihat oil and gas, nothing to do with that karena kita terus mengalami defisit. Sedangkan yang patut diperhatikan di sini yang saya lingkarin warna merah adalah iron and steel atau base metal, kita sebut saja base metal, dan ini bisa dilihat di chart yang warna coklat ini pada saat kuartal 4 nanti itu hampir mendekati angka 2 miliar dolar untuk rata-rata monthly-nya. Dan kalau kita lihat memang peningkatan itu mungkin sekitar 300 sampai 500 ribu dolar, dan ini memang purely karena beroperasinya smelters yang tadi saya sebutkan dua tadi, Freeport dan Aman Mineral. Dan kalau kita lihat juga di sini surplus untuk trade balance dari coal kita atau batu bara ini terlihat cukup steady. Artinya FOB atau rata-rata freight on board prices itu turun jauh ya, sekitar 130-an US dollar saat ini, tapi kita lihat bahwa volume kita cukup kuat. Jadi di kuartal 1 ini kita shipment total 95 juta ton, dan masih cukup strong atau kuat karena permintaan dari Cina ini masih cukup banyak. Dan kita lihat di kuartal 2 bulan April sudah keluar, volumenya masih di atas 30 juta dolar untuk 1 bulan kemarin, dan kita masih proyeksi tren ini masih akan continue di kuartal 2. Dan kita melihat bahwa memang inventory days, kalau inventory days di Cina memang karena domestic production, mungkin bulan lalu saya sempat bahas mengenai China domestic coal production itu sedang terjadi masalah, banyak mining yang di shutdown karena safety, makanya permintaan batubara dari Indonesia itu masih cukup kuat. Dan kita lihat memang mungkin ketika nanti semester 2 ketika Cina udah mencapai level coal inventory yang sudah cukup, artinya demand akan turun, tapi turun pun kami tidak melihat bahwa shipment coal secara quarterly itu tidak akan turun di bawah 90 juta ton nanti. Dan kita lihat yang saya lingkarin juga warna merah di sini adalah base metal ya, di mana on average di kuartal 1 ini kita shipment 5,4, which is 5,4 juta ton. Ini partly karena weaker Chinese demand, tetapi masuk ke bulan April shipment dari base metal kita itu mencapai 1,9 juta ton, dan kita lihat kalau ini masih continue maka kuartal 2 nanti secara total itu shipment base metal kita mencapai 5,8 juta ton. Nah, ada upside memang kalau teman kita perhatikan di sini di kuartal 3 ini shipment dari base metal dari 5,8 juta ton akan naik menjadi 6 juta ton. Ada tambahan sekitar 200 ribuan, dan kita lihat ini mostly akan lebih banyak dimulai produksi. Memang kalau kita bicara Freeport itu akan mulai di Juli atau Agustus, tapi kita tidak terlalu bullish di kuartal 3. Kenapa? Karena biasanya mereka trial and error production, which is kita expect bahwa full production baru ada di kuartal 4. Makanya upside dari sisi base metal di sini akan banyak sekali di kuartal 4 di mana ada peningkatan sekitar 500.000 ton shipment nanti ya untuk quarterly. Dan untuk CPO kuartal 2 mungkin akan lemah. Kenapa? Karena impact dari El Nino ini membuat produksi dari CPO itu agak melemah. Namun memasuki musim panen di kuartal 3 harusnya sudah mulai recover dan balik ke produksi normal lagi. At the end kita melihat bahwa surplus kita, trade surplus tadi kita udah bicara di awal bahwa mendekati angka 3,6, 3,7 itu adalah suatu harapan yang kita lihat di kuartal 4 nanti. Nah, kalau kita lihat gimana transaksinya terhadap GDP. Nah, kita lihat memang GDP ini suatu hal yang memang cukup interesting untuk kita lihat. Kenapa? Karena kalau ini teman-teman bisa lihat chart yang sebelah kiri, kita bagi antara external balance. External balance itu impact dari terms of trade yang tadi kita cerita, trade balance dan kawan-kawan. Nah, ekonomi Indonesia kalau kita lihat di sini yang warna orange ini adalah external balance. Dan external balance ini sangat tipis sekali sampai kuartal 1 ini nyaris nggak ada impact terhadap GDP. Tapi at the end kuartal 1 kita bisa mencapai pertumbuhan 5,3%. Ini ditopang domestic demand. Domestic demand yang really di-push sampai habis dan kita lihat apa yang terjadi adalah ketika pemerintah melihat bahwa faktor trade itu tidak akan membawa dampak terhadap GDP, maka pemerintah memainkan toolsnya dengan melakukan front load dari sisi budget spending. Nah, kita lihat di sini apa yang terjadi bahwa government spending di sini bisa dilihat kuartal 1 yang warna biru di sini ini tumbuh sangat signifikan 19%, which is ini outlier. Kenapa? Karena dalam beberapa pre-election years kalau kita ambil memang tinggi tetapi tidak setinggi sekarang. Nah, ini memang pemerintah benar-benar save our economy from shrinking karena tanpa ini let's say tumbuhnya biasa, government spending nggak di-push sampai setinggi itu, kita punya GDP mungkin will be slightly below 5%. Tapi dengan government spending yang di-boost up, maka kita punya GDP in total 5,3%. Nah, ke depan gimana? Kita melihat bahwa memang domestic demand ini will slowly losing traction. Kenapa? Karena pemerintah sudah front loading di depan. Nah, faktor kedua juga kita lihat di sini dari domestic demand adalah dari sisi investment growth atau gross fixed capital formation. Nah, kita lihat memang kuartal 3, kuartal 4 tahun lalu itu high base. Kenapa kita katakan high base? Karena waktu itu mesin dari Freeport dan Aman Mineral itu masuk. Dan ini direkod sebagai investasi dan memasuki kuartal 3, kuartal 4 tahun ini itu growth-nya akan slow down. Kita lihat di sini yang di 2024. Kuartal 2 mungkin masih oke, masih tumbuh karena masih dari low base, tapi masuk di kuartal 3, 4 ini investment growth akan sangat tipis sekali karena coming from high base dan ketika Freeport dan Aman Mineral Smelter sudah jadi, artinya mereka investmentnya sudah done dan smelter-smelter yang lain atau pabrik-pabrik yang lain lah yang akan menopang investasi kita. Jadi kita melihat bahwa in overall kalau kita lihat di sini di 2024 forecast kita proyeksi untuk GDP, government spending ini on track untuk mencapai highest pre-election years growth di 2024 di mana di angka 6,4% government spending. Sedangkan untuk investment biasanya pre-election 4,5, 4,5, tetapi dengan sudah hampir jadinya si Freeport dan Aman Mineral punya smelter, kami proyeksi cuman roughly mendekati angka 3%. Artinya dengan beroperasinya smelter tadi yang di awal kita bicara Freeport sama Aman Mineral ini akan benar-benar jadi buffer untuk kita punya GDP di kuartal 3 dan kuartal 4. Dan di sini kita lihat quarterly kita proyeksi kuartal 2 masih cukup oke, pertumbuhan masih di 5,3%. Kemudian kuartal 3 di 5,1%, kuartal 4 akan balik di 5,3% lagi, which is kami melihat secara full year GDP kita akan tumbuh di angka 5,2%. Artinya apa? Makro backdrop kita tidak jelek, sampai full year ini masih bagus dan kita melihat bahwa market itu saat ini lebih banyak fear dibandingkan greed-nya. Kenapa? Karena kita lihat karena account defisitnya negatif, terus kemudian dari sisi rupiah tiba-tiba melemah sampai 16.000. Jadi market kemarin di April itu panik dan kita lihat bahwa recovery akan will be gradual, nggak langsung bisa IHSG bisa balik semerta-merta langsung naik tinggi. Nah, ini mungkin secara GDP, secara macro backdrop, dan ini kalau sebenarnya kita untuk proyeksi ekonomi kita punya dua skenario, bull case dan juga base case. Nah, bull case ini kita assuming kita tidak ubah dari sisi government expenditure, investment maupun domestic demand, tetapi yang kita lihat di sini adalah consumption. Nah, di bull case kita asumsi bahwa konsumsi akan kuat di angka 5% sampai kuartal 2, kuartal 3, kuartal 4. Artinya Kita lihat bahwa kuartal 4 2023 kemarin kita punya consumption cuma tumbuh 4,5%, 4.5%, tetapi consumption di first quarter itu tumbuh 4,9%. Apa yang terjadi di situ adalah dana-dana kampanye mulai mutar. Ini membuat terjadi government private consumption itu tumbuh 4,9%. Tetapi masuk kuartal 2, kuartal 3 kita akan lihat ini kunci yang menurut kita di kuartal 2 nanti kita lihat seperti apa bahwa consumption kita tumbuh 5% atau tidak. Kalau ternyata tidak 5%, kita bisa shift to base case di mana assuming 4,8% consumption growth di sini, kita bisa lihat bahwa full year itu kita cuma tumbuh 5,1%. Jadi memang antara base sama bull itu selisihnya cuma 10 basis point. Jadi secara overall artinya target GDP kita 5,1 sampai 5,2 sampai di 2024 full year, dan ini menurut kita ini sebuah penopang bagus untuk equity market karena secara overall government still has some tools untuk mempertahankan GDP growth kita di atas 5%. Kemudian next mungkin kita bahas mungkin sedikit inflasi ya. Jadi fear of inflation ini memang sedikit mempengaruhi market, di mana kita tahu bahwa harga beras itu sudah naik melambung tinggi, tetapi yang terjadi di Maret dan April ini produksi beras di Indonesia, rice production itu jumping 5-fold, naik 5 kali lipat. Artinya apa? Ke depan kita melihat bahwa tren month on month itu akan terjadi deflasi dari beras, dan kita melihat bahwa sejauh ini beras memang mempunyai andil yang cukup kuat dari sisi kita punya food inflation ya, di mana kalau bisa lihat di komponen di sini bahwa secara umum inflasi kita headline itu 3%, 2%-nya itu datang dari food inflation, dan 0.6% atau 1/3 of food inflation itu datang dari rice, dan ini rice ini sudah masuk deflasi dan ini akan berlanjut terus. Artinya 2-3 bulan ke depan ini kita akan melihat terjadi deflasi, dan ini kita melihat bahwa peak inflasi itu sudah di belakang kita, dan dari 3% akan slowly turun ke 2,7% dalam beberapa bulan mendatang. Nah, mungkin di luar itu mungkin beberapa kawan-kawan media sering bahas bahwa inflasi bawang, inflasi daging ayam itu tinggi, tapi komponen terhadap inflasi mungkin harus dicatat di sini bahwa andilnya itu cuma 0,2% maksimal. Artinya tidak banyak mempengaruhi terhadap food inflations. Itu mungkin dari sisi inflasi. Jadi kami melihat bahwa Bank Indonesia dalam menentukan arah suku bunga, pertama dia akan lihat inflasi. Kalau inflasi memang sudah cenderung turun, yang kedua dia akan lihat capital outflow seperti apa. Nah, capital outflow ini menarik. Kenapa? Karena kalau kita bicara hard currency flow, trade plus capital flow, ini memang di bulan April ini trade-nya belum sempat saya masukin, ini 3,3 ya, artinya dari sisi trade itu 3,3 dan capital outflow -2, artinya secara hard currency kita masih plus 1 miliar dolar. Artinya apa? Rupiah yang melemah ini benar-benar di-drive oleh capital flow, yang memang capital flow itu kan daily, dia keluar hampir tiap hari, dan ini yang membuat kalau sehari keluar 2 triliun, 3 triliun, pemerintah harus mau nggak mau melakukan intervensi untuk menjaga stabilitas nilai tukar. Dan kita lihat memang performa rupiah kita itu one of the bottom 4, bottom 5 dari sisi regional ya, meskipun kita lihat kayak Baht Thailand dan Korean won itu turun lebih dalam. Jadi kita lihat memang capital outflow ini sangat mempengaruhi pergerakan rupiah. Dan kalau kita lihat juga kapan sih capital outflow ini akan berakhir. Nah, kita lihat di sini bahwa ini ada proyeksi dari US Treasury net bonds issuance upcoming notes, ini akan terus tinggi sampai kuarter at least bulan Agustus dan bulan September. Artinya sampai bulan segitu it's pretty much risk for Indonesia to have capital outflow untuk baik bonds maupun equity. Dan kita juga lihat di sini bahwa Japan and China no longer buying US bonds, ini holdingsnya mereka, dan kita lihat bahwa ini push other European countries untuk mau nggak mau exit the emerging market, dan mereka subscribe atau beli di US Treasury issuance yang memang by yield itu sekarang di angka 4,7% sampai 5% ya di sana. Nah, inilah yang kita lihat bahwa yang terjadi di sini bonds inflow tahun kemarin secara full year itu 80 triliun, udah reverse lebih dari setengah. Itu udah keluar semua outflow. Sedangkan untuk equity ini menarik. Kenapa? Karena investor asing cuma jualan 17 triliun. Tetapi yang terjadi adalah IHSG langsung turun di bottom. Dan kita perhatikan kuartal 1, kuartal 2 ini 2022 asing itu beli banyak banget 50 triliun. Mereka belum totally exit dari sisi equity. Artinya ke depan kita melihat bahwa memang equity memang sudah di bottom banget, dan we prefer equity over bonds. Dan kita lihat mungkin sebelum kita bahas equity di sini kita bahas mungkin sedikit bonds dan kita melihat bahwa fair yield calculation kita ini bear case di 7,3%, which is itu our peak yield yang kemarin sudah terjadi di bulan April atau awal Mei kemarin. Dan saat ini mungkin yield kita balik di sekitar 7%-an ya. 6,9% ya, 6,9%, dan kita melihat bahwa downside-nya mungkin ke 6,7%, dan bond yield akan bermain di sekitar situ. Artinya untuk bonds kita lebih saja investor untuk government bonds itu trading ketika yield 6,8 6,7 beli over 7% mungkin bisa jual kembali untuk mencari spread. Itu mungkin dari sisi fair yield yang hitungan kita. Dan kemudian untuk IHSG ini menarik. Kita mungkin teman-teman dari institusi asset management maupun Dapen ini bisa lihat bahwa agak nggak fair kalau kita melihat GCI sebagai IHSG atau Jakarta Composite sebagai kita punya acuan indeks. Kenapa? Karena kita coba kalkulasi, kita hitung sejak brand IPO kita keluarkan komponen dari Barito Group. Ternyata IHSG kita sebenarnya value-nya excluding Barito Group itu 6.635 per tutupan 21 Mei kemarin. Jadi kita melihat bahwa harusnya kita menghitung IHSG seperti ini, jangan menggunakan si GCI as a whole. Tetapi kalau kita lihat lebih baik kita pakai IDX 13. Nah, apart from that kita lihat bahwa di sini dengan IHSG kemarin di bottom 7.100 ini secara valuasi PE band sudah mendekati -2 standar deviasi. Artinya kalau kita take out si brand mungkin kita sekarang udah di -2 lebih sedikit standar deviasi towards historical mean. Dan kita lihat bahwa kalau kita pasang target IHSG seperti apa, kita melihat bahwa base case kita itu mungkin akan bisa balik recover ke 7.600. Artinya teman-teman bisa memanfaatkan posisi seperti ini untuk membeli saham-saham yang secara quality of stock cukup menarik. Stocks-nya apa, dan ini mungkin sedikit recap mengenai earnings. Mungkin saya skip langsung ke stocks-nya karena waktu sudah pukul 4. Flow kita mungkin sebelum ke stock kita bicara sedikit flow ya, di mana flow ini bulan April kemarin itu net flow terjadi keluar gede-gedean ya. Jadi we call it Fabulous Six di Indonesia. Ini ada 6 saham yang memang ini favorite investor asing dan foreign investor favorite, dan kita lihat di sini keluar 15,5 triliun. Dan kita lihat apa yang terjadi bahwa kalau kita tarik net flow dari tahun 2022 mereka masih ada 36 triliun, dan kita lihat bahwa sebenarnya yang agak sedikit vulnerable adalah Mandiri dan BNI. Kenapa? Karena investor asing itu masih ada 13 triliun dan 10 triliun di situ. Sedangkan BRI sama BCA itu udah setengah udah gone, dan kita melihat bahwa net sell mungkin udah akan sedikit terbatas di dua bank itu, terutama BCA mungkin bisa jadi safe haven. Nah, apart from the Fabulous Six, kita lihat bahwa ada 2 counter investor asing shelters di Indonesia, defensive stock itu di Indofood CBP, ICBP, dan IMRT. Ini kita lihat flow-nya itu nggak keluar sama sekali asing di April kemarin, artinya yang jual semua domestik, harganya turun, dan kita lihat bahwa ini harusnya bisa masuk. Dan untuk medium to small cap ada Bevin dan Ciputra. Kita melihat juga bahwa diam-diam investor asing itu punya portfolio 1 triliun di masing-masing stocks itu, dan kemarin Bevin itu turun dalam, asing nggak jualan, artinya they still have confidence untuk 2 stocks ini. Jadi ini mungkin pilihan saham yang bisa teman-teman perhatikan. Sedangkan untuk big banks secara valuasi baik konsensus maupun kita upside masih cukup besar di sekitar 19%-an sampai 20%. Bahkan Telkom konsensus masih upside 37%, kita 26%. Jadi in terms of fair value of those Fabulous Six stocks itu masih di atas. Artinya yang sekarang itu turun karena memang market reaction, dan kita melihat bahwa momentum ini untuk seperti tadi dijelaskan Mr. Mark bahwa dollar cost averaging, kalau kita beli ketika market itu downtrend, kita perbanyak kita punya modal di bottom, maka ketika dia recover kita mungkin bisa dapat setengah harga dibandingkan peak-nya tadi. Jadi kita suggest untuk investor bisa collect the Fabulous Six stocks ini at this time. Tapi balik lagi bahwa dari Fabulous Six ini perlu diperhatikan bahwa untuk beberapa saham seperti Mandiri ini perlu hati-hati. Kenapa? Karena kita melihat bahwa udah mendekati fair value untuk Mandiri, sedangkan BNI juga sedikit hati-hati karena mungkin kalau kita lihat sedikit di banks, both banks ini special mention loan-nya ini mulai naik nih. Jadi kalau kita lihat BNI itu dari 4,7 jadi 5,5, terus Mandiri 7,4. Memang improve tapi masih ada di angka 6%, highest among big four banks. Jadi kita melihat special mention ini ketika di downgrade, apa yang terjadi akan terjadi higher cost of credit. Dan kita lihat bahwa BRI justru lebih baik. Kenapa? Karena sebelum terjadi downgrade dari SML ke NPL, dia udah naikin guidance COC, dan guidance COC ini udah mentok, sedangkan bank lain BNI maupun Mandiri mungkin baru di kuartal 2 nanti, analyst meeting di kuartal 2 baru akan ada revise up. Nah, ketika terjadi revise up itu, kami khawatir bahwa si Mandiri sama BNI bisa di-rating kembali. Jadi dua bank itu sebaliknya dihindari dulu. Kalau BCA kenapa nggak usah takut? Kenapa? Karena tidak mungkin dia revise up credit cost. Kenapa? Karena dia punya provision udah paling besar. Jadi kami lebih prefer buy on weakness atau beli di BRI atau dollar cost averaging di BCA. Itu mungkin dari saya. Saya kembalikan ke Mas Ogi. Thank you.
Baik, itu tadi paparan dari Mas Iswan Felmi. Mas Iswan, terima kasih paparannya. Selanjutnya kita ada materi ketiga. Bapak Ibu sekalian, terima kasih untuk yang sudah hadir pada sesi webinar kita pada sore hari ini. Tadi sudah ada dua pemateri yang membawakan paparan mereka masing-masing. Ada Mark Tan dan juga Iswan Felmi. Setelah Iswan Helmi, yang ketiga, Mas Aryo sudah ready bersama kita. Apa kabar Mas Aryo? Boleh di-unmute dulu.
Sudah. Saya sudah
Mas Aryo,
jelas.
sinyalnya putus-putus sepertinya.
Mas
Yeah,
Ogi.
it's like Mr. Aryo bad signal.
Oh, oke.
Mas Aryo bisa masih putus-putus.
Masih putus-putus?
Betul. Ini videonya belum bergerak.
Sebentar.
Boleh kita coba lagi, Mas Aryo? Oke, sepertinya Bapak Ibu sekalian sepertinya sedang mencoba mencari koneksi yang lebih baik. Bersama kita akan menunggu Pak Aryo Perbongso dari Sinar Sekuritas. Oke, masih belum. Ada cukup banyak yang hadir hari ini. Oke, nah Mas Aryo telah...
Halo?
Yes, nah ini sambungannya
Ya,
lebih baik.
Nah, ini ya.
Siap. Oke, Pak Aryo, silakan untuk presentasi.
Baik, Mas Ogi, mungkin Bapak Ibu yang hadir di meeting ini, mungkin saya izin untuk menyampaikan presentasi saya dalam bahasa Indonesia ya. Oke, ini apakah sudah terlihat untuk presentasi saya?
Terlihat Bapak?
Sudah ya.
Oh, good, baik, betul.
Good. Oke, mungkin ingin melanjutkan beberapa market update sih yang tadi sudah disampaikan oleh Pak Isvan. Mungkin terkait dengan capital outflow, tadi kan sudah disampaikan bahwa sebenarnya ada trading capital outflow, dan sebenarnya dari BI pun juga sudah melakukan beberapa kebijakan ya, baik intervensi langsung maupun kemarin tuh meningkatkan tingkat suku bunga. Dan kalau kita lihat sebenarnya untuk per April kemarin itu terlihat bahwa cadangan devisa Indonesia itu sebenarnya turun sebesar 4,2 miliar dari yang sebelumnya di bulan Maret itu sebesar 140,4 miliar ya, itu 6,2 miliar, di mana hal tersebut digunakan untuk melakukan intervensi terhadap nilai kursnya sehingga menjadi sekitar 16.210 gitu. Di mana sebenarnya pada bulan April kemarin itu terdapat kebutuhan yang cukup tinggi untuk pembayaran utang luar negeri pemerintah ya, dan sehingga itu mengurangi tingkat cadangan devisa kita. Gimana kalau cadangan devisa kita ini, kalau kita lihat sebenarnya nilainya itu setara dengan membiayai sekitar 6,1 bulan impor atau bayaran utang luar negeri pemerintah ya. Dan biasanya itu sudah mulai mendekati nih batas informal. Kalau kita lihat nih, biasanya untuk batas informal untuk Bank Indonesia itu biasanya sekitar 6 bulan impor sih biasanya. Walaupun kalau kita lihat secara internasional itu adalah sekitar 3 bulan impor. Nah, Selanjutnya mungkin juga ingin menambahkan juga terkait untuk GDP growth memang benar bahwa secara eh, perekonomian kita tuh memang ditopang oleh domestic demand, di mana kalau kita lihat ini sebenarnya non tradable sektornya itu yang lebih mensupport untuk GDP growth kita di first quarter 2024 dibandingkan dengan tradable sektor. Kalau kita lihat sektor-sektor apa saja sih yang sebenarnya yang menopang dari pertumbuhan di first quarter 2024 itu, kalau kita lihat itu yang cukup tinggi itu adalah public administration sekitar 18,8% ya. Dari kuartal sebelumnya itu sebesar 1,61%, terus health itu sebesar 11,4%, education juga 7,34% ya, lebih tinggi daripada growth di bulan sebelumnya. Sedangkan kalau ya untuk tradable sektor yang walaupun sebenarnya cukup baik juga ya, mungkin contohnya seperti mining yang di eh, first Q ini dia itu growth ini sebesar 9,31% ya, meningkat daripada kuartal sebelumnya itu sebesar 7,46% yang ditopang oleh untuk mining dari coal dan iron ore mining, sedangkan untuk manufaktur pun juga tumbuh sebesar 4,13% dibandingkan kuartal sebelumnya dikarenakan adanya growth karena adanya kegiatan hilirisasi basic metal ya, yang untuk basic metal ini terdapat growth sebesar 16,6% ya secara uh, di kuartal 1 2024 ini. Dan per ini mungkin update untuk government budget ya. Untuk per tanggal 6 Mei kemarin, eh, pemerintah sudah menerbitkan obligasi sebesar 386,6 triliun eh, untuk atau sebesar 30,4% ya dari target biaya obligasi di tahun 2024 ya, dengan asumsi defisit anggaran sebesar 2,3% ya dari GDP. Dan kalau kita lihat berdasarkan realisasi APBN di tahun 2023 kemarin itu biasanya ada peningkatan yang tiba-tiba untuk pembiayaan non utang dan program pinjaman ya. Sehingga kami juga berekspektasi di tahun 2024 nanti kemungkinan juga akan terjadi hal yang sama, yang sehingga membuat apa namanya untuk tekanan pasokan obligasi di paruh kedua mungkin akan lebih mereda ya, karena kami mengekspektasikan akan ada pembiayaan non utang dan program pinjaman itu perkiraan kami itu sekitar 230 sampai 260 triliun, dan untuk program pinjaman itu bisa sekitar 40 sampai 45 triliun ya untuk di akhir tahun, di akhir periode nanti di tahun 2024. Dan di sini kalau kita lihat ini berdasarkan untuk nominal yield ya untuk government bond secara 10 years, dilihat sebenarnya kalau kita lihat rankingnya untuk di Indonesia secara nominal itu kita berada di nomor 7 ya, sebesar 6,98% ya di per 15 Mei datanya. Sedangkan secara real yield pun juga sebenarnya nilai kita, real yield kita itu adalah sebesar 3,98% ya. Itu adalah tertinggi kelima kalau di emerging market. Dan secara pergerakan pun sebenarnya saat ini telah turun ya dari titik puncaknya sebelumnya di 7,2% di awal bulan Mei ya, karena dibantu oleh adanya pembelian bond oleh Bank Indonesia, insurance dan individual ya. Walaupun sebenarnya untuk foreign secara year to date-nya itu terdapat dana keluar sebesar 44,5 triliun. Dan kalau kita lihat secara fair value yield-nya, sebenarnya untuk di akhir tahun ini konsisten juga dengan yang disampaikan oleh Pak Iswan sebelumnya, itu bahwa untuk di akhir tahun kami ekspektasi sekitar 6,72% ya. Tapi kami mengantisipasi kemungkinan ada terjadinya volatilitas ya yang berlangsung di pasar obligasi pemerintah dalam waktu dekat karena adanya kekhawatiran terkait perekonomian US. Dan mungkin kami juga memperkirakan dalam pergerakannya ke akhir tahun nanti bisa saja nanti yield obligasi yang bertenor 10 tahun ini bisa mencapai yield 6,65% ya gitu. Tapi bisa juga nanti akan bounce back ke 6,72 ya. Dan kemudian kalau menurut kami berdasarkan perhitungan fair value kami itu merekomendasikan untuk mungkin lebih mempertahankan durasi yang pendek ya, dan memperkirakan yield yang akan turun ya. Jadi lebih megang bond-bond yang durasinya pendek tersebut, mengingat dan sambil menunggu jika ada yield yang akan turun yang didorong oleh yang pertama adalah ekspektasi batas atas utang US yang akan diberlakukan kembali pada eh, Januari 2005, limit upset-nya tersebut. Kemudian kedua itu adalah di mana pengeluaran US itu akan jadi normal ya setelah election election year ya, di tahun November 2024 ya. Yang mungkin itu akan melemahkan ekonomi US yang nantinya bisa membuat Fed melakukan cut rate ya. Nah, mungkin selanjutnya kita akan eh, fokus ke sukuk dan corporate bond market update. Di sini kalau kita lihat di sini lebih kalau kita lihat sebenarnya di bulan April baik dari sukuk dan corporate bond itu penerbitannya sudah cukup pick up ya, dan itu walaupun sebenarnya ada ada peningkatan banking credit growth ya, dan sekitar 12% bulan kemarin, serta adanya ekspektasi interest rate yang akan turun ya di kuartal 3 2024. Nah, kalau kita lihat secara sukuk sebenarnya mungkin untuk ada di sini mungkin highlight-nya adalah penerbitan di tahun 2024 ini saat ini sudah melebihi dari tahun sebelumnya, yaitu tahun 2024 itu sebesar 3,1 triliun, di mana di periode yang sebelumnya itu sebesar 2,8 triliun ya, di mana untuk top 10 sukuk market outstanding-nya itu sebesar 63,8% dari total sukuk outstanding market ya di Indonesia. Dan oleh karena itu kami mempunyai keyakinan bahwa penerbitan sukuk tersebut bisa berada sekitar sesuai dengan proyeksi kami, yaitu sekitar antara 15 sampai 20 triliun ya, yang lebih tinggi daripada tahun 2023, dan hal tersebut juga didukung oleh kalau kita hitung sebenarnya jatuh tempo di sukuk tahun 2024 itu sekitar 16 triliun ya di tahun 2024 itu. Dan kalau kita lihat secara berdasarkan sektor sebenarnya yang cukup mayor di yang jatuh tempo itu adalah di sektor financial institution, telekomunikasi dan pulp and paper, serta perusahaan yang terbesar yang jatuh tempo itu adalah Jasa Marga, Pada Antol, terus PT Mora Telematika Indonesia, dan PT Pegadaian Persero. Nah, di sini kalau kita lihat sebenarnya ini adalah dampak dari keadaan higher for longer ya, di mana untuk secara average coupon rate untuk sukuk di bulan April 2024 dari Januari sampai April 2024 kemarin secara average itu lebih tinggi daripada coupon rate yang sukuknya diterbitkan di selama tahun 2023 kemarin ya. Jadi di sini memang walaupun sudah pick up, tapi dari EPT-nya masih kena dampaknya baik di sukuk, dan nanti mungkin kita lihat juga nanti di corporate bond pun juga seperti itu. Nah, kemudian untuk ini adalah isu di pasar obligasi, di mana sebenarnya per April kemarin itu mencapai 34,5 triliun, lebih besar daripada periode yang sama di tahun lalu sebesar 30,5 triliun, dan di mana top 10 issuer-nya itu sebesar 46,1 ya dari total bond market-nya ya, dan itu terdiri dari Merdeka Copper Gold, Indah Kiat, dan PT Sarana Gria Financial ya. Dan itu juga mendukung tesis kami bahwa issuance ini akan bisa mencapai proyeksi kami untuk corporate bond itu sekitar 120 sampai 140 triliun, di mana untuk total jatuh tempo untuk corporate bond di 2024 itu sebesar 128,3 triliun, di mana yang paling besar itu ada di Desember itu sebesar 22,6 triliun. Dan kalau berdasarkan sektor itu adalah paling tinggi adalah financial institution, bank, dan metal and mineral mining yang akan jatuh tempo di tahun 2024, dan top 10 terbesarnya itu adalah top 3 maksud saya itu adalah Bumi Resource, Semen Indonesia, dan Bank Mandiri. Dan ini mungkin yang tadi saya sampaikan juga ya, bahwa untuk coupon rate di corporate bond pun juga terkena untuk kondisi higher for longer juga ya. Jadi istilahnya average coupon rate yang diterbitkan di tahun 2024 ini jauh lebih mahal daripada coupon rate yang diterbitkan di tahun 2023. Dan kalau kita lihat secara yield spread-nya di antara government dengan corporate bond, kita bandingkan antara April sampai bulan Maret ini, itu apa namanya, juga semakin meningkat ya. Contohnya untuk obligasi dengan tenor 1 tahun dengan peringkat triple E, itu rata-ratanya itu meningkat sebesar 3,36 basis point, sedangkan untuk obligasi bertenor 10 tahun dengan peringkat triple B flat itu meningkat sebesar 1,9 basis point ya. Nah, kalau kemudian kami juga melakukan analisis regresi ya terkait credit spread untuk government bond 5 year dengan corporate bond 5 tahun ya, dengan untuk rating triple E, double E, dan single E. Dan di sini berdasarkan skenario kami yang ada di tabel ini, di sini untuk rating triple E sebenarnya spreadnya itu untuk quarter 2 itu antara 82,5 basis point sampai 86,9 basis point, dan itu akan selanjutnya akan terus menurun ya sampai di kuartal 4 2024 itu menjadi 76,4 basis point ya. Dan hal tersebut pun terjadi juga ya di double E dan di single E, di mana untuk rasio apa namanya, untuk spread yield-nya untuk di double E itu turun, yang sebelumnya paling rendah itu di 165,3 basis point menjadi 150,3 basis point, sedangkan untuk credit spread single E-nya itu dari 297,6 basis point menjadi 275,0 basis point. Nah, berikut presentasi dari saya, mungkin saya kembalikan lagi ke Mas Ogi ya. Ya, terima kasih.
Oke, terima kasih Mas Ariel untuk thank you Mas Ariel for your presentation, and we still have 3 speakers today, Mr. Martin, Mr. Isvan Helmi, and Mr. Ariel Bongso. If there's any questions for all the speakers, we are happy to answer your questions. But first of all, we have a question here for Mr. Isvan. Pak Isvan mau bertanya, prospek TLKM, Telkom, penurunannya apakah karena fundamental Telkom jelek atau memang asing yang masih outflow karena global sentiment takut akan sama seperti UNVR? Mungkin Pak Isvan bisa menjawab pertanyaan tersebut.
Mungkin saya bantu jawab di sini bahwa Telkom ini sebenarnya penurunan terjadi karena memang isu utamanya adalah ketika dia melakukan launching Telkomsel Lite. Ini beberapa investor asing memang agak sedikit skeptis di mana dengan menurunkan paket yang menjadi Telkomsel Lite, artinya dia akan bermain di lower price range dibandingkan dengan kompetitornya. Artinya market yang tadinya dia nggak main, dia malah sekarang main. Artinya dia menurunkan kelasnya, dan ini terlihat sekali bahwa investor asing doesn't really like what they did, dan mereka ngelihat bahwa dengan adanya Telkomsel Lite ini diluncurkan akan terjadi perang harga yang lebih gila lagi. Artinya apa? Ada resiko bahwa Telkom bisa kehilangan number of subscriber-nya di beberapa kuartal mendatang. Jadi memang saya tidak bilang bahwa ini the next Unilever, tetapi kita mencermati bahwa Telkomsel Lite ini berhasil atau enggak strateginya. Kalau seandainya di kuartal 2 numbers-nya itu ternyata subscriber growth-nya itu masih ada dan tidak terjadi penurunan, maka mungkin investor asing bisa berbalik lagi. Jadi pada saat tahap ini market itu masih wait and see. Jadi kami melihat bahwa ini it's not really stocks to avoid, tapi bisa dicermati untuk beberapa kuartal lagi. Artinya kalau mau beli sekarang boleh, tetapi exposure jangan terlalu banyak sambil kita menunggu data dari operasional data di kuartal 2 nanti. Itu mungkin jawaban saya. Secara fundamental masih bagus, artinya top line masih growing 2-3%, bisa mencapai 5% pun masih bisa, masih sekitar low to mid single digit dari sisi revenue growth, which is it's a normal norms untuk Telkom growth segitu. Jadi memang ini investor asing memang jual karena memang melihat bahwa strateginya itu melenceng dari apa yang selama ini dia lakukan. Itu aja sih mungkin jawaban dari aku.
Oke, itu tadi jawaban dari pertanyaan tersebut. Is there any questions from attendees? if there's no questions, maybe I will ask speakers if there anyone who want to say closing statement, Mr. Marston maybe, or Pak Iswan ada yang mau disampaikan penutup, Pak Aryo?
Mungkin dari aku buat teman-teman untuk portfolio manager terutama kita melihat bahwa it's a rare chance to shoot very rare elephant coming. Jadi mengambil quote-nya Warren Buffett, if you want to short rare elephant moving, you have to have loaded gun. Artinya melihat kondisi market yang saat ini BBRI itu juga tertekan cukup dalam, Mandiri dan kawan-kawan juga Telkom ini. Kita melihat bahwa ketika nanti semester 2 macro backdrop itu sudah recover, kita juga melihat bahwa earnings no worries. Kenapa? Karena di first quarter ini tadi saya skip pembahasan sectoral earnings karena waktu mepet. EPS growth atau earnings growth dari GCI masih berada di positive territory. Bahkan kalau kita take out tech stock pun kita masih di positif. Artinya dari sisi earnings growth ini harusnya akan slowly recover, dan kita berharap bahwa tadi balik lagi di GDP bahwa kita punya dua skenario, consumption growth 5% atau consumption growth 4.8%. Even with both skenario kita masih proyeksi bahwa GDP growth kita di atas 5%, dan kita melihat bahwa macro backdrop nggak ada masalah sama sekali, dan April kemarin it's a temporary setback, dan harusnya bisa dimanfaatkan untuk kembali membeli saham-saham dengan fundamental yang bagus di harga yang cukup murah ya. Itu mungkin ya dari saya.
Okay. Mr. Aryo, is there anything you want to say? Mr. Iswan, maybe you can turn on your camera, and Mr. Aryo, so I can capture some pictures. Maybe Mr. Aryo want to say something. So
mungkin
after this, Mr. Mark will make a closing statement.
Okay, thank you, Mas Ogi. Maybe as I mentioned previously in my presentation that currently there is uncertainty in fixed income as it is impacted by what's called instability in US market, yeah, as well as therefore we recommend that you maybe for fund manager you should put your portfolio in short duration and in chance there's a cut rate especially after the election, maybe after election that the Fed could cut the rate, therefore you can change your duration for your bond into for a longer term. That's from my presentation. So gets back to you for Mas Ogi.
Okay, that's from Aryo Prabongso. Mr. Martin, do you have closing statement for today's session, please? You still mute.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to say, one thing about investing in global markets, and particularly my favorite destination, the US market. It pays to be optimistic, in the long run rather than, trying to be pessimistic, for any period of time, because it's very difficult to time the markets. And if you're optimist, you're actually right nearly 80% of the time. Stay invested over the long run. Do not be caught up by pessimistic headlines, deluge of bad news and jump in or out of the market. Stay invested in the long run, dollar cost average, and you should do well over time. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Mas Ogi, you're still muted.
I'm sorry, all speakers already say their final statement, but there's one more question. Starlink, Mr. Iswan, do you think Starlink give impact to Telkom?
I think it's still a long process, artinya potensinya akan masuk ke Indonesia, dan kita lihat bahwa itu akan ada proses-proses yang memang pemerintah pun akan melakukan proteksi terhadap apa yang sudah ada di sini. Artinya it's a long way proses, dan kita melihat bahwa kita melihat bahwa impact terhadap Telkom mungkin ada tapi dalam jangka panjang. Tapi kita lihat juga bahwa subscriber Telkom ini adalah kebanyakan adalah orang yang loyal subscriber, beda dengan Indosat yang memang Indosat dan XL itu selalu berpindah-pindah. Artinya siapa yang murah dia akan mendapat subscriber. Tapi kalau untuk Telkomsel justru penggunanya itu rata-rata usia dari nomornya itu udah lebih dari 10 tahun. Jadi kita melihat bahwa it will be impacted but in the long run, tapi dalam jangka menengah memang ketika progres dari announcement akan masuk, kemudian ada progres perizinan macam-macam, kita lihat mungkin masih akan berdampak dari sisi stok, tapi balik lagi bahwa it's a long term impact, bukan short term.
Okay. Okay, thank you Mas Isvan for your answers. Terima kasih Bapak Ibu juga telah hadir pada sesi webinar Global and Domestic Investment Strategies kita pada sore hari ini. Karena tidak ada lagi pertanyaan, maka dengan ini saya Ogi Wicaksana dari tim Public Relations di Sinarmas Sekuritas mengakhiri seminar pada sore hari ini. And thank you, Mr. Marktan, for come to us and share your thought. This is the end of our webinar for today, and it's one of our pleasure to see you, and maybe we will see you again very soon. Good luck for your.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
luck in your investing
Marktan.
journey.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Good afternoon.